Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friday Night Live. Hope everyone is well. I'll get straight on with the questions. Sorry, I'm a minute late this week. Dear me. Um, First one, could you talk about ambition, please? So, ambition, I think this is something I wrote about in Alcohol Explained too. But when I'm talking about ambition, I'm not talking about it in its narrow sense of just wanting to get a promotion at work. I'm talking about it in it being kind of like a driving force in not just human beings actually, but all living creatures, which is a desire to improve one's lot in life. Okay, and for me, it's that's broken down into two separate, distinct driving forces. One of which is we tend to be very critical of what we have, and the other is of which is we tend to idolize what we don't have. So that's what I see ambition being made up of. All living creatures are very critical of what they have and they idolize what they don't have. And in that way, we're driven to keep improving ourselves. And quite a lot of the time I hear people, some people stop drinking and then they stop smoking and then they look at their caffeine and they almost look at it in a critical way. And it's like, well, what's wrong with me? I'm always picking holes and trying to find the next thing. And I think, well, no, that's not a bad thing. That's you improving your life. And that's the natural tendency when we want to improve our life. You pick the biggest, most problematic thing and you try and deal with it. You either deal with it or you don't deal with it. If you don't deal with it, then you're continually knocking your head against the wall trying to sort it out. But if you do manage to deal with it, it's human nature then to look for the next thing and to try and sort that out. And that's great. That's us continually improving. But the reason I talk about ambition in respect of drinking and addiction is because it tends to work against us horribly. Because when we are drinking, it isn't pleasant. We don't like it. We're tired. We're anxious. We're not sleeping properly. We're really lethargic. It's not a pleasant existence. It's as simple as that. And even when we're actually drinking, we know at a fairly deep level that it isn't a happy or good thing to be doing. And even when we're sat there having our daily or nightly drinks, whenever it is, we know at a fairly basic level that those people who have never drunk or haven't drunk for a few months are far happier and better off than we are. So we want to stop. So let's assume for the moment that we do manage to stop. In a very short space of time, our brain chemistry gets back to normal. We start feeling much more mentally resilient. We're feeling much more positive, much happier. Bad things still happen. Of course they do. That's life. But we're much better equipped to deal with them. Our heart rate slows down, so we've got more energy. We're sleeping better. Everything becomes much, much better. But the problem is twofold. Firstly, we tend to take things for granted and they very quickly become the norm. So we start to forget how much better we feel when we're not drinking. But more importantly, the effects of ambition kick in because we start to become very critical of what we do have, i.e., sobriety, and we start to idolize what we don't have, i.e., drinking. So there's a natural tendency when we've quit drinking to start to really pick holes in what we have because it's like, oh, but I can't go out and enjoy a drink with my friends. And so all the massive benefits you've got from not drinking, and you're worrying about the fact that you can't go out and take a sedative with your friends, like that's going to be enjoyable anyway. But also, the more important thing, you start looking back on your drinking days and idolizing it. So you forget the hundreds of thousands of drinks that you drank that you don't even really remember, just slumped in front of the TV, half comatose, or out with friends making a complete idiot of yourself and not really enjoying their company anyway. And you think of those very, very few drinks that we drank and we really thought we enjoyed, like, the first couple of drinks when you arrive on holiday or, drinking on Christmas or something. So you forget the reality and you start having this weird kind of impossible fantasy about how great your drinking was. The problem is, of course, if you start drinking again, you don't return to the fantasy, you return to the reality. And that's one of the reasons why not just drinkers, But a lot of addicts swing constantly from taking the drug to not taking the drug. This is one of the reasons. The other, of course, is fading effect bias, but the question's about ambition, so I'll stick with that. Over time, there is a tendency to take sobriety for granted is the first point. Secondly, to start picking holes in it. And thirdly, to start idolising your drinking. And so that's why quite a lot of the time, if people don't understand things properly, it's just an unpleasant existence because they're either drinking and they're miserable, so they quit drinking and then they're miserable again. They're just not happy wherever they are. So that's the ambition. I'll go to that into that a bit more detail in probably not in more detail. Probably covered it off completely. So the next question. Hello, William. I found the chapter in Alcohol Explained 2 about self-image fascinating. It seems changing our self-image is a key component of the mindset shift. Would you talk about that, please? So this is another one, Alcohol Explained 2 this evening. So self-image is obviously it's how we perceive ourselves. But a lot of people don't realize how really powerful it is. It causes you to act in certain ways, but it's also it kind of creates a feeling of superiority. And most people wouldn't like that, to think of themselves, oh no, I don't think of myself as superior. But if you think of how you perceive yourself, whatever country, culture, religion, political group's a great one. Think of your political affiliations and think of the opposition. We do tend to think of ourselves as superior to them. Okay. Now, the problem is where drinking comes in, those of us who have spent years and years, decades of drinking, our self-image is that of a drinker. Because we are drinking, we start to look at our drinking as being, cool and rebellious and fun, and we build up this real image about it. And one of the big things to think about is your drinking heroes and heroines. So the people that you think about, like your iconic drinkers, like Oliver Reed, and programs like Sex in the City where they're always drinking, it's really glamorous. We build our self-images around that, so we see ourselves in that kind of, it's fantasy, it's complete nonsense. But it's really powerful nonsense, and it becomes a massive part of our lives. So this is one of the problematic things with quitting alcohol, so you don't pick the drink up. But a lot of people still have that self-image that drinking alcohol is cool and fun and rebellious. So they're almost at odds with themselves because they've quit drinking, but their ideal human being is a drinker. Their ideal self is a drinker. So you need to put some work in to see sobriety. And I genuinely think it's not just trying to see it in a warped way to make it look more interesting and more fun, but just see it more realistically. I mean, don't forget these great iconic drinkers, all they're doing is taking a drug in the same way that if you go back 60, 70 years and look at like PR photographs of people, they're all smoking. And it looks pretty ridiculous these days. No one tends to do it anymore. It's a sign of the times. So you do need to start, you don't need to, but it's much, much easier if you start to change your self-image. I think that's one of the problems we've got at the moment is the sobriety is seen, to a large degree, it's seen as people who have got a problem with alcohol, which is usually blamed on the individual and not the drug, because even now there's a massive amount of people who see alcohol, oh, it's not addictive, it's because the drinker has trauma in their lives, or they have some kind of underlying health condition, or it's genetics. It's, God forbid, that it's the drug, that it's simply an addictive drug. Oh no, it's the victim's fault, it's the addict that's the problem. So we tend to see drinking as really cool and sophisticated and fun, and we tend to see people not drinking as kind of being weak and damaged in some way, which is really, firstly, incorrect, but also very damaging because it spoils the self-image of the non-drinker. So that's something you do really need to work on. You need to think about your drinking heroes and heroines and see it for the absolute nonsense that it is, and start to work on your own self-image. And frankly, it is a more realistic one because people like to think of themselves as strong, courageous, mentally resilient, powerful. And And alcohol robs you of all of that. It makes you feel anxious. It makes you feel tired. It makes you feel lethargic. It makes you unfit. So I genuinely think it's not just trying to, see things in a different way. It is just sticking with the reality of it and seeing it for what it really is. Hi, William. My memory is shockingly bad. I'm sure it's from years of drink and drugs. Long-term memory is particularly bad. Do you think it will always be bad, or does it improve with being alcohol-free? There's a lot we don't understand about memory. It's all theoretical. Most of the time, it does seem to improve when people stop drinking and drugs. Some people just seem to have memory that's not as good as other people. But I would say, don't forget how much memory is to do with actually concentrating on things and paying attention to them. If you're doing the same thing day in, day out, you're not going to remember it. Because this was one of the things, I spent a dozen years commuting in and out of the city of London going to work. I couldn't tell you, literally, I'd get home and I wouldn't remember the journey because they all meld into one. It wasn't that I was drinking on it or I have a particularly bad memory. It's just when you're doing the same thing all the time, you tend not to remember it. So there's that aspect, but also bear in mind, if you're busy, you're not going to remember so much because you've got your mind on so many different things. There's a theory that the human mind can only think of 7 things at any one time. So if you've got a lot on, if you've got a job, you've got bills to pay, you've got kids, you've got this, that, and the other, then yes, you're going to find yourself constantly walking into a room and thinking, what did I come in here for? Not because you've got a bad memory, but because you've got 50 other things pressing for attention in your brain at any one time. So what I would say is, it's certainly not going to get worse for stopping drinking. Okay, alcohol has a shocking effect on memory, so it's only going to improve. You might be someone who just doesn't have a particularly good memory anyway, but for most people, it's not that at all. It's just that we tend to live very busy lives, often repetitive lives. So you're doing the same thing day in, day out. I mean, I've done a year of lockdown now. And every day feels exactly the same. I probably couldn't tell you, 5 separate days in all of that. I'd struggle to remember any of them. So I think it can be a mixture of different things. So just bear that in mind. I've been invited to a friend's house. I told her I no longer drink, and she keeps telling me that I can have one to live my life and not to worry about it. And that she doesn't have a problem with drinking, which is why she hasn't stopped, implying that I do. I'm loath to go, as it seems that the evening is going to be centered around drinking, and that is the cement for the friendship, which is fairly new. I work with her, but haven't socialized with her outside work. I don't want to have to, I don't want to have one to keep her quiet either and ruin my resolve. I don't want to drink, and I'm probably not going to go because it looks like it's going to be awkward with me not drinking. I'm 5 weeks alcohol free and not getting major cravings as the penny is finally dropping thanks to your book and the live talks. How to handle this kind of situation? Any advice? Thank you. Well, actually, you're doing fantastically then. So well done. And anything you don't want to do, you don't do. It really is that simple. If you're not comfortable going, then don't go. I was talking, funny enough, I've just come off a live with Dawn, and I said on that there tends to be 2 situations, situations that are inherently enjoyable without alcohol and situations that you're only doing to get to the alcohol. And when you quit drinking, carry on doing the things that are enjoyable, but don't feel any requirement to do the things that aren't enjoyable. So this does sound like one of those situations where you're going to go around and drink. And it might not be particularly enjoyable for you. So I would say feel absolutely free not to go. Also, if she's implying that you do have a problem, it's probably not perhaps the nicest of relationships to be going into with a friend anyway. But absolutely don't have a drink just to keep her quiet. That's the most ridiculous thing ever. Sorry, I'm not having a go at you, but just don't do that. You're completely happy. You and you alone decide what goes into your body. Okay. And you should never be pressured by anyone to put anything inside yourself that you don't want. Food, drink, drugs, nothing. It's your choice. So I would say, I mean, you could go and see how you get on, But for me, if I was going around to someone's house and I knew it was going to be centered around alcohol almost exclusively, I would either not go, or I would make a reason why I would only go for an hour or so. So I would say, yes, that would be great, but I've got X, Y, or Z. I need to be back for 8 or 9 or whenever, give yourself an hour. Because what I usually find is when people are drinking, they're all right for the first bit. But when the alcohol starts to take effect and they start repeating themselves and they think they're far funnier than they are, and they're just extremely boring, but talking really enthusiastically about something you have no interest in, that's the time probably to leave. So I would say, don't go if you're not interested. Don't feel obliged to. If you do go, maybe give yourself that cut off that you're not going to stay the whole evening. William, you mentioned in a recent live that you are 7 years alcohol free since February 14. Can you talk a little bit more about your final decision? How did you reach that decision? Did you have failed attempts before that? And how were the subsequent months for you after stopping? Were there any significant milestones such as 3, 6 or 9 months? We see a lot of people sending in comments and questions about the seemingly critical point of getting past these milestones, when for some, cravings can start to resurface and some people break. I did. I myself have stopped about 3 times, ranging from 2 to 6 month period alcohol free before each time relapsing. I'm currently reading Alcohol Explained 1 and believe now more than ever that my next and near quitting point will be the ultimate and final. As well as your book, your lives are really helping me right now. Thank you. So my final decision was kind of forced upon me because things had come to a head. Funny enough, I just talked about this in Dawn's Instagram live, so I won't talk about it again now, but it kind of, for personal reasons, I had to stop, or there were going to be some fairly dramatic life changes for me. So did I have failed attempts before that? Well, kind of yes and no, because I never used to. So I would stop and start again, but I never really said to myself, I'm going to stop forever. I'd kind of just stop, thinking this is getting a bit out of hand, I'm going to stop. I never really thought to myself it would be forever. And at some point I'd just go back to it. So it never felt like I was trying to stop forever and failing. It more felt like I was going to stop for a bit and always come back to it. So it was probably slightly different. So were there any significant milestones? So I don't think majorly, but I do remember, I think it was about the 3-month mark, because I had very young children at the time and I think they were weaning. So we were just about giving them solid foods. And I remember like steaming some vegetables for them and kind of like tasting them and thinking, actually, these taste okay. And then I started like actually enjoying vegetables, which I hadn't done in years. So I kind of had, the only massive milestone I remember is that 3-month mark. I found my diet changing massively, and not because I was trying to change it, but just genuinely through choice. And I write about this in Alcohol Explained 1. When you drink alcohol, it prevents you from absorbing certain key vitamins. So you become very low in these certain vitamins. Now, usually when you have got a deficiency in vitamins, you need to take them again for about 3 months before you get up to a decent level. And of course, your body triggers feelings of hunger, not only when you're low in calories, but also when you're low in vitamins. So when you're drinking heavily on a regular basis, you tend to be low in vitamins, which is going to trigger this constant hunger. So that was one of the ideas I had about maybe what that was. After 3 months, my vitamin levels got back to normal, and actually my appetites then returned to normal. So instead of craving like loads of highly calorific food all the time, I started to change slightly then. I mean, the only other thing was sort of after, I think it was about a week or so, I started sleeping properly and then started waking up feeling much better. But I know that period differs massively for different people depending on how regular they've been drinking before they stop. So that's it really. So yeah, I think that's sort of covered that off. Don't forget though, with the cravings are a conscious thought process that start off by you thinking how nice it would be to have a drink, and then you refine it and torture yourself by considering the actual possibility of having one. So they can happen at any time. They can happen the minute you finish your last drink. They can happen 30 years after 30 years of sobriety. Because if you sit there and think, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to have a drink? Wouldn't I be so much happier with a drink? And then start really fantasizing about it. And it is always a fantasy. It's never a reality. We torture ourselves with a fantasy of it. So if you're doing that, you will crave. So craving is a conscious thing. So it's not a physical thing. It's a conscious thought process. So it's not like the physical withdrawal and the physical after effects of alcohol will end and you will feel better for them, but you might not stop craving if you're continually thinking about how nice it would be to have a drink. The next question is a very good one. Do you feel morality, ethics, religion, spirituality has anything to do with the ability to stop drinking? No, I don't at all. I think the ability to stop drinking is basically seeing alcohol in a different light so that you no longer want it. Now, for me, that was a sort of a, if you like, a re-education, just a full understanding of what alcohol does and crucially what it doesn't do for people. But where I think it can be quite important is because when we're drinking, we tend to spend a lot of time and energy in our drinking. And if we're not actually drinking, we tend to be hungover and a bit under par. So we tend to neglect other aspects of our lives, be it our partners, our children, our jobs. And I'm not talking about like chronic alcoholics where they're not working and they're incapable of looking after their children. Just people who are drinking a few drinks a day and a bit tired during the day, so things are getting on top of them. Now, for people who are religious, they will quite often put the religious aspect of their lives on hold while they're drinking. So when they stop, they will naturally want to go back to the religious side of things. So that's absolutely fine. But I think that with AA has kind of made people think that drinking is to do with some kind of spiritual malaise, but I don't see that particularly, and I kind of think that theory has pretty much gone to the. I mean, unfortunately, it's been replaced by other equally absurd theories. So in the 1930s, it was you have some kind of spiritual deficiency, which is why you can't control your drinking. But now what we seem to have moved on to is you have some kind of genetic or underlying childhood trauma, which is why you can't control your drinking, which I don't actually think is much better. I mean, the fact of the matter is people can't control their drinking because it's an addictive drug, because one dose wears off, leaving an unpleasant feeling, which needs another drink to relieve it. So every drink creates the desire for the next one. That's what addiction is. Alcohol is that. It kind of, I don't know why people are constantly trying to overcomplicate things. I'm getting a bit worried about post-lockdown socializing. Like, how do I meet new sober friends these days? I don't want to socialize and be around drink, but life is lonely. So the sober movement's growing and growing and growing. And I don't know what country you're in, but of course, here in London, we've got Club Soda, which actually sets up, particularly in London, meetings for people who aren't drinking. So you go out and they will do like pub crawls to certain pubs where they know they've got good alcohol-free options. So everyone meets up. I did one of them, obviously it was before lockdown, but you meet up and then you go and do a little pub crawl, try a few different pubs and try different alcohol-free drinks. So there is loads and loads of stuff. And so, again, it's a bit difficult to say when you're not, I don't know whereabouts you are, but there's a lot of stuff out there. And of course, you don't have to just find specifically sober things. You just need to find things that aren't centered around alcohol. So, like walking clubs or chess clubs or whatever interests you, you can do a lot of these things. There may be people there who drink or don't drink, but the fact of the matter is the key is it's not completely focused on drinking. Hi, William. How long did it take till you were sure that you will never drink alcohol again after you stopped finally? Have you ever felt any temptation or cravings for a drink during your first alcohol-free year? When did that stop finally? So this kind of goes back to what I was talking about with cravings. So a craving is a conscious thought process where you start fantasizing about having a drink, okay, and you can refine that and make it even more torturous by entertaining the possibility of having one. Because if you're thinking in the abstract, a drink would be nice now, you're not in a particularly happy position if you're not going to let yourself have one. But if you start thinking, ooh, you know what, there's some beers in the fridge, or it'll only take me a minute to pop up the off license, I could always stop tomorrow, you're refining the torture. Imagine if you're really hungry and you start thinking about your favorite food, like a pizza, it's going to be unpleasant. But if you've got one of them in front of you and you're just about to take a mouthful of it, it's even more painful. Okay. And that's what a craving is. So I think what you're talking about here is all part and parcel of the same thing, because one of the key things is, and Alan Carr worked this out back in the 1980s, certainty can negate cravings. Because if you know you're never going to drink again, you don't start fantasizing about it, and you never entertain the possibility of having one. So for me, when I quit, it was crunch time and I knew I had to quit. And that's all I really knew. And that made it easier for me because I never started thinking, oh, shall I have a drink tonight? I never went down that road in my mind. There was a lot I didn't understand at that time. And I've strengthened my sobriety probably tenfold since then. But I think that was the thing. And so there weren't really any temptations, and there certainly weren't cravings during my first alcohol-free year, because of that certainty. And a lot of people don't have that because the door is always open. But for me, for many reasons, it wasn't. So that would have made things a lot easier. But don't forget, if you can get to the place with alcohol where you see it in such a way that you just don't want it anymore, there are no cravings, okay? And you don't have to wait for a year or 10 years or anything. From the moment you no longer desire it, you're free, because you don't crave things you don't want. A part of that is recognizing that the craving process is idolizing. It's making it out to be something that it isn't. Always remember what we're talking about here. It's a sedative. It just makes you feel slightly dulled. People will even now tell you that drinking makes you feel euphoric, that it releases endorphins. It doesn't. Okay, it can do in certain situations. If you're drinking while you're socializing, you will get endorphins, not because of the alcohol, but because as human beings, the brain releases endorphins when we're socializing. Okay, but alcohol on its own cannot make you release endorphins. It is a sedative. It is that simple. If you're a long-term heavy drinker, so you're waking up suffering from really bad anxiety, and then you're having a drink and it's relaxing you, making you feel better, yes, you can get some endorphins then, because your brain's rewarding you for doing something that it perceives as beneficial. But alcohol on its own doesn't make you release endorphins unless you're chronically addicted to it. So just keep that in mind, what we're dealing with. It's not the big thing that people make it out to be. William, I'm not sure if you have addressed this before, and if so, I apologise. What's your view on smoking marijuana? In the USA, it is legal in many places and used recreationally. How should one formerly addicted to alcohol approach these things? Avoid at all cost, or with some caution? It is okay? So for me, what happens when we drink alcohol, because it is a sedative, we tend to use it as a coping mechanism. So if we have a bad day or a stressful experience, like an argument with our partner, or just problems with the kids, or anything that causes us to feel annoyed or anxious or whatever, we drink because it anesthetizes those feelings. So it becomes our go-to coping mechanism. If you have a bad day, you have a drink at the end of it. Okay, so when you quit drinking, and this is why a lot of people then start turning to maybe eating too much sugar, or smoking too many cigarettes, or drinking loads of caffeine, because they're conditioned to consuming something to change how they feel. Okay, so you can just quit, and then when something bad happens, there's no alcohol, so you're immediately looking for something else to consume to change how you feel. Or you can develop some slightly better coping mechanisms. So for me, exercise a lot, and I find that helps massively. But people use yoga, meditation. You can read books, you can watch films, you can play games, you can talk to friends. There's loads of different things you can do. But the point is, it's useful to develop something new. I think the problem is with marijuana is it's kind of, it's probably better than drinking, absolutely. But do you really want to be stopping drinking and then just smoking loads of marijuana all the time? Probably not. Is it going to give you your best chance of living the best life ever? Probably not. Because bearing in mind, all of these things do have an effect on how your brain works. And I think what most people find eventually is that if they leave the chemical balance in their brain alone, that's when they're at their best. They feel at their best mentally, the most mentally resilient. They feel they're sleeping at their best. They're waking up feeling bright, because marijuana can, it can help you relax and it can be quite good fun, but you do always feel a bit groggy the next day. So it can have loads of different effects. So does it leave you feeling the best you possibly can? It's probably not. And one of the key things I think about giving up alcohol is it's to realize that not drinking makes you feel so much better. And it is a feeling like no other, to wake up feeling refreshed and ready to go, and to feel positive and fairly happy throughout the entire day. And I suspect you might be robbing yourself of that if you're smoking marijuana. Having said all that, I think if it was legal here, I would be having it on occasion. So it's one of those do as I say, not as I do. But no, I would probably be inclined to avoid it, because I think apart from anything else, you want to learn to live your life, and to deal with the highs and the lows without taking a drug, is what it comes down to. Hi, William. I read today something that resonated with me about failure relapse. It went something like this: failure is not proof of your inability to pull off sobriety, it's proof of your courage. I wonder, would you speak to the many that are trying but ultimately are still drinking? Thank you. So I've said this a few times and I will say it again now. I don't see people who are trying to quit drinking as weak or deficient in any way. I see it as, it takes courage, and it takes imagination to question drinking and to want to quit. Okay. The nature of it is, when it wears off, it leaves you feeling anxious, it makes you leave you feeling scared, you're easily overwhelmed with problems, and it's so easy then to just have a drink in the evening, and to let all that wash away. And most people, that's what they do. Okay. And they're too afraid to question it. They would rather bury their heads in the sand, and pretend everything is all right. It takes courage and imagination to think, this is not right. And not only is it not right, but I'm going to do something about it. So for me, even if you're constantly drinking every single day, and you never manage to string a single day one together, you're still better and more courageous and more imaginative than the 87% of the population that are drinking regularly, who cannot see it for what it is. So forget whether you're succeeding or not succeeding. You're already ahead of the pack by recognizing that it's a problem and having the courage and the balls to actually do something about it. So I absolutely agree with that. And you've got to keep trying with these things as well. People don't achieve things on the first moment. I didn't. And I don't know anyone who did. I think there are some people supposedly who did, but most people aren't. They just have to keep trying and try what works. And there's a lot out there that you can do these days. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, it was AA or nothing. There's loads out there at the moment. So if one thing isn't working, move on to the next. And like I've said a million times, your recovery is not a fixed menu, be it Alcohol Explained or AA or anything. It's a buffet. You go in and you pick what you want and leave the rest. So if you like this and this that I'm saying, and you don't like that and that, then take what you want, and look elsewhere and cherry pick what you want. Don't let anyone tell you, do it this way, don't do it this way. Listen to what everyone has to say and make what works for you. Keep looking and keep trying. My feeds are overloaded by Clean & Co. and similar 1% alcohol volume. Thoughts, please. Downward spiral. Yes, absolutely. So there are some alcohol-free drinks that are like 0.0% alcohol. Just to explain, everyone has alcohol in them. Okay, your digestive system has certain bacteria in it, which excretes alcohol. So that's why when they're doing blood tests for driving, to check people's alcohol levels when they're driving, it's never zero, because nobody has zero. Everyone has minimal amounts of alcohol in them for these bacteria. And apart from the fact a lot of the food we eat will, like apparently a ripe banana's got whatever percentage of alcohol in it. But the fact of the matter is, it's not nominal amounts of alcohol that's the problem. It's when there's enough to spike a physiological reaction. Because when you're drinking regularly, what your brain is doing, it's becoming hypersensitive to counteract the depressant, the sedating effects of the alcohol. And when the alcohol wears off, you're left with that period of anxiety. That's alcohol withdrawal. So what you want to avoid is anything that causes your brain to trigger that reaction. That will differ from people to people, person to person, and it's impossible to say exactly what may or may not do that. But you don't want to be drinking anything at 1% alcohol, because it may well do that. It is a downward spiral as well. I think the best thing you can do is just not consume alcohol. There will be occasions where you might accidentally do that. I've done it. I took night nurse when I had the flu once, and it's like 20% alcohol. It's like having a small glass of sherry. Ridiculous that they put it in this thing. But anyway, I did that, and it didn't. So I think just you need to avoid it though as much as you possibly can. And in fact, I try to avoid even so-called alcohol-free when it's like 0.5% of alcohol in it. I had a bottle of that once, and I felt like really weird the next day. I felt quite anxious, on edge, and that might have been nothing to do with the drink at all, or it may have been. But the fact of the matter is, why would you even want alcohol, 1% alcohol drink? There's drinks out there. If you're thirsty, drink something without alcohol in it. If you're not thirsty, don't bother having a drink. So yeah, I would avoid that like the plague, to be honest. But having said that, I do drink, the 0.0% alcohol on occasion, which are the alcohol-free beers, because I think that's so small. And I did do a post on it actually in the on the website, because it is an issue for some people. And rather interestingly, there was a test done once where they got a load of previous very heavy drinkers, and they gave them alcohol-free beer, and they found that there was a spike in dopamine after it. And so at the time, everyone was jumping up and down saying, "Oh, alcohol-free beer can make you feel really good." But what they were doing was misunderstanding what dopamine does. People confuse dopamine with endorphins. Endorphins make you feel good. Dopamine is a motivator. It makes you want to do things. It's not a particularly pleasant feeling. It's one of the reasons why when you wake up, when you've been drinking, you want to eat loads. You want to go and do stuff. That's what dopamine does. And what that test actually suggests is, even if there's no alcohol in it, if you've got a very strong correlation between a certain taste and alcohol going into your bloodstream, your brain can trigger a physiological response just from the taste and the concept of it going through that motion. So I will bear that in mind as well. Blackout. I stopped drinking especially because of this. I hate the feeling of not knowing anything about the last night. I was a binge heavy drinker for more than 20 years. Now I have almost 500 days alcohol free. Like 2 years before I stopped drinking, I started to suffer the blackouts. And after the first one, it was so frequently. Sometimes my wife told me that I wasn't drunk when I asked her how I finished the night. During most of that 20 year, I drank a lot on weekends, more like more than 20 beers or whiskey or whatever. But I always remembered how I finished the night, how drunk I was, how I got home, how difficult it was to put the key in the door of the house, and so on. My question is blackout permanent damage to the brain as a result of cumulative abuse of alcohol? So it's not permanent, because if you stop drinking, you won't get blackouts, but it is accumulative. So the buildup of alcohol over time is what causes the blackout. So this is all theoretical again. People don't really understand how memories work, but the generally accepted theory is that you have short-term memory and long-term memory. So short-term memory is the kind of thing you need to hold a conversation with someone. So if I'm having a chat with you about the weather, you will need to remember the last couple of minutes of conversation to contextualize it. But, a year later, you probably won't remember what we talked about. So there's short-term memory and long-term memory. And the idea is that alcohol prevents short-term memories from going into the long-term memory. But it is accumulative, which is where you get to those very strange situations, which I did a few times. When you're drinking all day, every day, you might not have enough to actually be really obviously intoxicated, but it's enough to stop the short-term memories going into the long-term memory. So you can be knocking around the house, kind of secretly drinking, but appearing fairly sober to everyone else. But the next day you have absolutely no memory of it. And it's not that you were doing anything crazy or that you were really drunk. It's just because it's day after day after day. It's a build up. But as I say, no, it's not permanent, because if you quit drinking, you won't have it anymore. What do you say to people who say without alcohol, you are limiting your... What do you say to people who say without alcohol, you are limiting your choices in life? How... I don't know. I could think of some extremely rude things to say to them. Limiting your choices in life. See, this just highlights the extent to which alcohol addiction is just so accepted in our society. Forget physical addiction. Okay, I'm talking about being incapable of enjoying or coping with a situation without your drug. Okay, that may not be physical addiction, but if you cannot cope or enjoy with a certain situation without a drink, you are reliant on that drug in order to cope with or enjoy that situation. How is taking a sedative limiting your choices in life? It's an extraordinary thing. It's one of these things that, like a night without alcohol isn't as much fun. It's one of those silly little sayings that when you pick it apart, it's just so nonsensical. How can taking a sedative limit your choices in life? Do you think you're limiting your choices in life if you're not injecting heroin? They're the same basic things. They're just sedatives. They just anesthetize slightly, or one more so than the other, depending on how much you're taking of it. But no, it's absolutely ridiculous. But what it demonstrates to people that are saying it, it shows that they are addicted, if not physically, emotionally, and psychologically, because for them, that's exactly what it's doing, because you can't choose to go on holiday and enjoy it without alcohol, because you can't enjoy a holiday without alcohol. So you therefore don't have that choice. And that's what it's saying. It's not saying anything about the fact that alcohol limits your choices in life. What it's saying is the people who are saying it are clearly addicted because they cannot enjoy these things without alcohol. Here is my question for tonight, even though I'm ashamed to ask it. How long does it take to enjoy being with your kids once you get sober? It seems that when I drank, I could actually take the whining, as it didn't bother me as much. It's as if the booze used to close my ears and soften my nerves, at least during the drink, much less so the next day. Any insight would be good, as you've already mentioned a few times that parenting is difficult with or without booze. This is one of the things for me. It's like everyone seems to talk about parenting like it's the most wonderful thing in the world, and I really struggled with it, and it's not the thing it's cracked up to be. It's one of those things that everyone, I don't know, I remember watching this game show once, and it was this actor on it, and he was saying like, oh, the most wonderful thing in my whole life is being a parent. I was thinking, I just don't see it that way at all. It's really hard work. It's, tiredness, arguments, moaning, untidy house. It's one of those things that, people kind of always make it out to be so good. And I just didn't find it that way at all. All I would say is a few things. Alcohol will make it worse, because if you're not, the one thing I always say for parenting is you need patience and you need energy. Okay, alcohol absolutely robs you of those two things. I don't know how old your children are, but it does get better, or it certainly did for me anyway. The younger they are, the more difficult it is. And as they get older, it becomes not only less difficult, but more enjoyable. The other thing I would say is this is something we tend to underestimate the fact that the degree to which we broadcast our emotions, particularly if you're a parent in a house. So if you're walking around looking miserable and depressed, your kids will pick up on that and they will be miserable and depressed. And if you're short-tempered and moaning at them, they will start moaning and shouting back at you. So it is easier said than done sometimes, but try to just enjoy it, because the more happiness you broadcast, the more happier they are. Not all the time by any stretch of the imagination, but usually it just helps things. The other thing I do all the time is we go out every day for an hour or more. They get run ragged, because this is something I've found as well. This isn't anything to do with drink, but I suppose it is, because I wouldn't have had the energy to do this if I was drinking. But kids, the tireder they are physically, the happier they are. When my two haven't been out for ages, they'll be bickering and moaning and carrying on. Then we'll go out for a good couple of hours until they're exhausted, and they'll sit there quietly reading a book or just playing a game or something. So that's what I would say. It does get better, or at least it did for me. And if you're not drinking, you've got the energy to go out and do stuff with them. And I don't know where in the world you are, but if you're in the UK, there's lockdown now. But honestly, we go out every day. I don't care if it's raining, if it's freezing cold. We go out and they get run ragged, and it does them the world of good. Probably true for grown-ups as well, to be honest. I think everyone could do with a bit more of that. Anyway, I hope that's been useful for everyone. I've got, Dawn reminded me it's Good Friday next week, so I'll have a think about whether to do the live on Thursday or keep with it on the Friday, maybe. I don't know. I don't think I'll be doing anything on Friday night anyway. But anyway, I'll post in the group during the week. Have a good weekend, everyone, and I shall see you next week at some point.